Data. Now, what should we talk about? Let's talk about the Labour Party. That should keep us going for a little while. And we got joining us for that chat, Stephen Kinnock, the Labour MP for Aberavon, who has, of course, been in very recent times a vociferous critic of Jeremy Corbyn. That was before the election. We'll find out how it goes now. Morning to you, Stephen. Thanks for coming in.
Morning.
I think I'm detecting a bit of a shift in the wind, Stephen. You tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, Owen Smith, who stood against Jeremy Corbyn, of course, we remember the contest very, very well. He said he was unelectable. I heard him the other day saying that Jeremy Corbyn had proved that he was right, that Jeremy Corbyn had been vindicated. He said, and I'm only vaguely paraphrasing, that he wishes he could bottle the essence of Jeremy Corbyn now. He didn't actually run around saying, "Jez, we can," but if he had, it wouldn't have surprised me. Were you wrong about Jeremy Corbyn, Stephen?
I think that the manifesto was an absolute sea change because it was both radical and realistic. We had a positive vision for the country, uplifting, constructive, based on hope, not on the division that we've seen so much of from the Tories. But it was also realistic. It was fully costed. Jeremy was clear on all sorts of issues where there'd been concerns around, for example, renewal of Trident. And so what we saw, I think, was a party. I mean, something magical happened in the campaign where we rallied around that manifesto and we rallied around our leader. And in stark contrast to the Tory suicide note and trying to create a personality cult around somebody who has no personality.
OK, look, we don't want to do a post-mortem for too long at all on the general election, but you raised one or two points which are relevant to the present and to the future. Clearly, that Labour manifesto went down well, with more people than you might have anticipated. There's another question which is included in what you said, or a suggestion, that the manifesto was also a credible piece of work. There were costings in the manifesto, but you had people like the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying it just wasn't honest, that the borrowing and the taxing would have to be vastly higher than was suggested there. And I think you agreed with them on that. Are you retracting that view? Are you saying there was no question mark over the economics behind that Labour manifesto in your mind at all?
No, I mean, we set out £48.6 billion worth of tax-raising measures, and we set out £48.6 billion worth of additional spending to end the utterly self-defeating Tory austerity policies.
Yes.
We also had a £250 billion transformation fund because interest rates are at record lows. Now, what we need to...
And they would have stayed low. If Jeremy Corbyn was now Prime Minister in number 10 Downing Street, in your mind, you wouldn't be looking, we can't know, but you wouldn't be looking at a meltdown in the markets. You wouldn't be looking at an interest rate crisis. You wouldn't be looking at a problem with equity prices. You wouldn't be looking at sterling wobbling all over the place. You're shaking your head. You think it would have been absolutely fine?
No, I mean, look, we have a Tory party that had promised to balance the books by 2015 and then was then saying 2025. So I think we take no lectures from the Tory party on economic competence, and it's time to stop that narrative and to say, actually, if you want the economy to grow in a sustainable way, you need to invest. You need better infrastructure. You need industrial policy. You've got to rebalance the economy.
Please do understand, because our conversation is always very civilised. And I'm not trying to rub your nose in what you said before. I am just trying to trace and track your arguments. Because from what you're saying now, it's as if you're unsaying everything that you said before.
No, I mean, I think the concerns that the PLP raised from the beginning were that we might end up in a situation where we had an uncosted laundry list and that there were going to be rainbows.
And those points were answered.
And those points were answered.
And now and for the future, Jeremy Corbyn for you is a perfectly qualified, ideal Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Look, we had a great result on Thursday, but we're still 60 seats behind the Tories. The way in which to get back into government, which is a real measure of success, is by broadening our appeal.
Okay.
That means we need to continue to build on the platform, which was both radical and also realistic, that the manifesto gave.
That raises an interesting question.
It's
I want
about
to
broadening
bring
our
George
appeal.
and Heather and Mark in a second, but before I open this up in that way, when you say what you just said, do you mean that, let's say, so-called moderates like yourself in the Labour Party should now be thinking again and being ready, if you're called upon, to serve in the next Jeremy Corbyn shadow ministerial team? Would that be a good idea for you?
John, the British electorate sent the Labour Party a clear message on Thursday. They want us in there holding this government to account.
So if you're called, you will serve, Steve.
Absolutely. I mean, if we need a front bench of all the talents, Jeremy knows that he's got to broaden our appeal. If he were to ask me to serve, I'd be honoured to do so. I have absolutely no idea if that's in his mind. But I make a general point. I make a I think the fundamental question is, how do we win those 60 seats? How do we end this utterly divisive and hopeless and weak and damaged Tory government, get the country back on the right footing. The only way to do that is to win 60 more seats. And if we're going to do that, we have to continue to broaden our appeal. We have to continue on the path that the manifesto set us on. And
so
that also means...
for the good of the Labour Party, and you argue for the good of the country, time to get at the salt and pepper and just sprinkle it over the humble pie and just wolf it all down.
You know, I actually make absolutely no apology for what's happened, because I think what we saw was two very democratic processes, open leadership elections, and Jeremy was honed in the heat of battle in those elections, in stark contrast to Theresa May, who all she had to do was win the Tory Game of Thrones.
You think he changed? You think this process, like a crucible, made him a different material in a different shape?
When you saw the difference in the campaigning abilities of those two leaders, I think you saw a leader in Jeremy who'd been forged in the heat of battle. And the PLP, I think...
Sounds very heroic. It's like a Game of Thrones.
It is Game of Thrones. That's right. And I think, you know, in stark contrast to Theresa May, who got there because everybody else ran away. And that's because I think maybe politics is changing in this country. Maybe people
Certainly
are actually sick and tired of politicians nodding dogs, chanting robotic slogans. We in the party, in the PLP, stood up, said what we thought. Jeremy was very resilient, pushed back on that, but we ended coalescing around a manifesto that was the best of the Labour Party. It was radical and it was realistic.
George, Mark?
Stephen, I agree with a lot of what you've been saying about Jeremy Corbyn. I think it was a really authentic, uplifting campaign that he fought, but I'm still very doubtful whether that manifesto would ever get you across the line in the 60 seats you need to win to get a majority in the House of Commons, because I think there's a danger in all this. We start to think that Labour somehow won this election. In fact, you lost it. And I just wonder whether you think there is a bit of a one more heave attitude starting to take hold in the party, that just keep going, be a bit more left-wing and you can win this election.
No, I think that was why I was sort of responding to John's point on personnel. We've got to make sure that we have the right breadth. The Labour Party has always been a broad church, and it works when it speaks to the different parts of the population. But I also think it means looking at the manifesto and saying, OK, we now need more flesh on the bone. So that £250 billion transformation fund, what's it going to be spent on? How
is that
it
code,
smartly?
Stephen, for when you say more personnel in helping out doing their job, is that code for surrounding him and maybe just hedging him in a bit?
No, I mean, I think as I go back to the point that I think that what the election on Thursday told us is that it was also about the tone of politics, and people are sick and tired of the kind of robotic chanting of mantras. They want to be treated like adults, and they know that there are divisions and disagreements within political parties.
We'll get a quick word
with
Heather and from Mark Stevens. Heather.
I'm just interested in whether it makes you rethink to some extent what the Brexit vote meant, you know, because some of those UKIP voters that Labour was incredibly worried about in some of those sort of northern seats seem to have come back to Labour. And you were one of those backbenchers who was saying quite vociferously that you were very worried about immigration as an issue, and you felt that was something people were, you know, a point that people were keen to make when they voted Brexit. Does this tell us that actually, you know, it was anti-austerity as much as anything else, and people, you know, being left behind as much as anything else, which is always the sort of Corbynite analysis of the Brexit vote, wasn't it?
Absolutely. This election wasn't about Brexit. It was about the underlying causes of Brexit. And what I think we saw as well is that the parties that were sort of in denial about it, SNP, all suffered. And those who pragmatically said, look, we've got to accept we're leaving the EU, those parties did well. And we have to continue on that track. And I think that means now there is, in my view, clearly no mandate for a hard Brexit anymore. We've got to do our very best now in Parliament to reach out to pro-Remain Tories and to get the softest possible deal.
Do you agree with Lord Heseltine that it may never happen now?
No, I don't agree with that, actually. I think we do, you know, we have stood on a manifesto which said we accept that Brexit will happen. But
quick one from Mark Steele.
There's no mandate for a hard
Mark
Brexit.
Steele.
Well, I think what happened is that the Conservatives have created a world in which what would be very moderate policies appear to be radical because they've moved so far to the right. So, for example, a thing like renationalising the railways in a very sort of measured way, as was proposed, they can portray that as Marxist nonsense and so on. And they didn't realise that it's both radical, but it's actually a very not that Marxist or radical to suggest raising corporation tax to a level that it was a few years ago anyway, and spending the money on schools and hospitals and social care. So not that radical to say, let's not condemn people with dementia to have to sell their house to live and so on. And so that's that's why this has happened, in a sense. That what has been a radical programme has been able to be very popular. I think the opponents of... and also the distaste for sort of politicians in general, the establishment. When the way that Corbyn called for Theresa May to resign was so Corbyn-esque, because you would expect someone, I call upon you in the name of the land, and instead he sort of mucked it up and went, well, I think...
Yeah, I'm not sure he meant to do it, to be honest, speaking to them afterwards.
That's the way he went, I mean, she should go, actually.
Yeah.
And at first I thought, oh, no, do it. And then I thought, no, that's why people like him, because he represents something different. And I assume, if I just say, I'll try and be quick, is that I think the opponents of Jeremy Corbyn inside the Labour Party over the last couple of years are probably in two camps. There's people ideologically opposed to him, around Tony Blair, you might say. I think that's quite a small number. And then there's many, many more people who think, I would like those ideas to be popular, but we'll never be able to do well in an election with that. And those people now think, I was wrong, and they're very, very pleasantly surprised to be wrong.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Stephen, thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
Always good
pleasure.
to talk
Thank you
to
very
you.
much.
I've got to move on because the time is always